Welcome to Amnesty Podcast, where we dive deep into some of the most pressing human rights issues around the world and discussing with human rights activists and advocates. So I'm your host, Targel, and today we're joined by Yan Ветцел, our Senior Policy Advisor at Law and Policy Program at International Secretariat of Amnesty International. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So today we will talk about the most urgent and complex human rights issues around the world and some of the gaps that is facing to international law, and also about how the activists and individuals we can do to contribute to the human rights cause. So without further ado, let's dive in. So let's start with an introduction. So could you please tell us about what you do at Amnesty, what's your role at Amnesty, and some of the works that you have been working recently?
Sure, would be my pleasure. So I essentially have two hats. One is that I'm a regional advisor. I'm based in the Bangkok regional office of the International Secretariat. So I get a lot of questions out of Asia, the Pacific, whether it's Southeast Asia or East Asia. And I try my best to advise. But I'm also a member of the international justice team within the Law and Policy Program. So my team is very much working on questions of armed conflict, international justice, as the name implies, meaning international courts or other ways to get international justice, accountability for serious human rights violations, international humanitarian law, these types of questions. So one aspect of my work is I get questions from Amnesty Mongolia. What is the law on a specific question? What is Amnesty's policy on a specific question? And I try my best to help that. Or I review a lot of materials that come to us. As you know, Amnesty International is an international human rights organization where all of our work is based on international human rights. So my team and my program is looking at, is what we are asking, is that actually in line with international human rights? Is that what international treaties or custom or court decisions actually demand? Because it's really important for our reputation that we are correct in these things. And I review materials, media statements, big reports. But we also have our own projects. We do our own research, for example, when it comes to the death penalty. I'm a lawyer. Many in my team are lawyers. So we help with what we call strategic litigation. So sometimes Amnesty International goes to court. We've done that recently in Mongolia at the Constitutional Court with regard to a case on police detention. And, I was involved in writing the submission, setting out, what are standards for detention in police custody, what is the state allowed to do, what is the state not allowed to do. And then we gave that to the court, and the court in its eventual judgment actually agreed on many points with us. So that law now needs to be changed soon. So we try different ways to improve the human rights standards. On the one hand, we apply them and make sure that all our statements are in line with international human rights. But on the other hand, in our projects, we also try to expand these standards. For example, through whether it's court decisions or legislative projects, for example, when we advise on the human rights defender law in Mongolia, or when we actually try to set or to help setting better standards on the international level. So, for example, right now I'm involved in a project on a draft treaty on crimes against humanity, where Amnesty and, of course, many other NGOs and other stakeholders were actually trying to create a new treaty looking at what states need to do about a particular type of crime of international law, which is crime against humanity.
Okay, thank you for answering, and it's really clear that you have so much on your plate already. So since you mentioned the convention, also there's some of the crises that are happening recently. So my first question is about so recently we have been witnessing so much a lot of crises and humanitarian crisis that is happening all around the world, like the crisis in Gaza and war and aggression against Ukraine. And witnessing all of that, people are really questioning the effectiveness of international law, international order, and we've been seeing that some of the international community that we believed in is not acting the way we thought they would. So my question is about, do you think, is it because of there is a gap in the international law itself, or is it like failing to work in a practice or in a practical way?
So first, just when we talk about these crises, you mentioned Gaza and Ukraine, these at least get international attention. Mm-hmm. We could continue the list by all these crises that do not get international attention. There's still a war going on in Myanmar. There's an internal armed conflict in Sudan. There are many of these conflicts that don't make international headlines, but Amnesty is working on those. We do research. Our country colleagues, our regional colleagues do research to at least create public awareness. We really need to make sure that there are no conflicts that are forgotten. These victims are just as much victims as the one in, let's say, Gaza, West Bank, or Ukraine. But specifically to your question, is it gaps? Is it failure of practice? Well, it's all of the above. So one is indeed international law has gaps in both the standard that are being set, the standards that need to be held, but especially with regard to enforcement. But that is one of the positions of Amnesty, or one of the work that Amnesty is doing to try to decrease these gaps. Mm-hmm. International law will never be as tightly bound, as full and dense of rules as any national system. It's really two different things. But we are trying to decrease the wiggle room for states. Mm-hmm. For example, we have identified, again, crimes against humanity as one gap in international law, and now we're trying to fill that gap. But it is also practice. So one issue that Amnesty looks at very closely, and we were one of the first, others are now following, is the question of double standards. Mm-hmm. States, but also international organizations, often, and they say we have to for political reasons, but they often engage in what we will call double standards. They do not make consistent decisions. They do not apply international law or fulfill their duties under international law consistently. And there are many, many examples, but just to mention a few, for example, at the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor decided with regard to the Iraq war, I'll just exclude UK, Great Britain forces from my investigation. For Afghanistan, I'll just exclude US forces from my investigation. The official justification always was, well, we need to prioritize, we have limited capacity, limited budget, we need to see where the gravest violations are. But interestingly, these decisions often come out protecting, in these cases, Western states, their allies, for example, in Afghanistan, also crimes by the former government, then allied with the United States, they're also excluded. So, Amnesty needs to insist that we use equal standards and equal treatment for these crimes and for these crisis situations. Otherwise, and that is maybe the third point here, is states really are encouraged to get away with wrongdoing. On Ukraine, we need to remember the 2022 invasion. That wasn't the first invasion of Ukraine. It was the full-scale invasion, or the attempt, but in 2014, Putin and Russia already invaded Crimea and annexed Crimea. And the international community did not respond very strongly. So, of course, somebody like Putin will be encouraged to then try the next step. There are too many situations where states, but especially, it's not states as an abstract entity, but the power holders in states think or believe they can get away with particular wrongdoing. And our ideal is to create a world where they don't get away, where either they are in their political calculus, they're deterred and say, oh, the costs are too high, or where if they do wrong, if they violate international law and human rights, that at some point there's a reckoning, there's an accountability. So, for example, we are very much supporting the idea that the International Criminal Court, I've just criticized the International Criminal Court, but at the same time, it did pass an arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin. And we think that's a good thing. We think there should be, at some point, an investigation. This may not happen tomorrow. It may maybe never happen at all. But what we can already see is that Putin, for example, is limited in his travel space. He needs to be careful where he's traveling. So his life choices, so to speak, are already limited, and that is one step to close these gaps.
Okay, so as you mentioned, that now the states are encouraged to get away by their wrongdoings. So in your opinion, how the proposed convention against crime against humanity, how it could change the situation, the current situation?
So at the United Nations right now, there's the project, and has been for 10 years, a project of creating a treaty on crimes against humanity. We already have treaties on war crimes, Geneva Conventions. We have a treaty on genocide, Genocide Convention. We do not have a specific treaty on crimes against humanity. Now we have what we call draft articles, which would be the basis of a treaty. And my team and others, we work on getting this onto the path to a full-fledged convention. And this convention would add value in various ways. For one, it would really recognize particular crimes. Part of Amnesty's work is, highlighting. We have a candle. Our candle logo is there to shine a light. So we shine a light on these conflicts, including forgotten conflicts in Sudan or Yemen or, Syria, wherever. So by having crimes recognized in this Crimes Against Humanity Convention, crimes like gender apartheid, crimes like forced pregnancy, crimes like enslavement, it gives the victims and the survivors recognition. It basically says, I hear you, I see you, we do not forget about you. So that's one aspect. Another aspect is that the legal framework as we have right now is very much about criminal prosecution after a crime happened. So, for example, at the International Criminal Court, that will only kick in after a crime happened, and then they'll do an investigation, and then they'll get various judicial authorities and more investigation, and maybe years down the road, you have a few cases and for a small number of individuals. Now, the Crime Against Humanity Convention would kick in earlier because it's actually a convention on prevention and punishment of crimes against humanity. So it has two prongs, two functions. One, punishment, we know that, how that works. But the other one is prevention, to only try to actually avoid bloodshed, or at least, minimize it, to come in early. And it sets down state duties, what they need to do in order to prevent potential crimes against humanity in their own states, but also to raise a warning if they think this is about to happen or is happening in another state. They can raise their voice, they can become active, they can call out other states They could even take states to the International Court of Justice under the present proposal to say, look, this state is not fulfilling its obligations under this treaty to prevent, to not commit crimes against humanity. Let's make this public. Let's, even if we don't have individual criminal prosecutions or verdicts, let's increase the political costs for that state. Let's publicize what's happening. Let's create peer pressure. Let's do findings. Let's do research, and make it more difficult for that state and those power holders to get away with anything.
Okay, so now moving to more another topic. So recently, Amnesty International's report stated that what's happening in Israel is an apartheid. But our listeners may associate apartheid as what happened in South Africa. So my question is, on what grounds Amnesty claim that it is an apartheid? It is really an apartheid.
But it's actually not a different topic. It's actually the topic, a continuation, because apartheid actually is a crime against humanity. And therefore, this crime against humanity treaty would also address situations of apartheid. Apartheid is not a static norm or description or concept. We've applied that to Israel, but we've also applied it to Myanmar, to the treatment of Rohingyas in Rakhine State in Myanmar. The point of apartheid really is you have a system of oppression, of a systematic discrimination, of suppressing, in case of apartheid, a racial group with the intention to keep that group suppressed, to really create a second class of citizens. That's what happened in South Africa under the apartheid regime. And that is basically the same that has for decades and still is happening in Gaza and the West Banks. Palestinians are treated as second-class citizens. They can't travel freely. They are enclosed in certain areas. They don't have full citizenship rights when it comes to voting or anything else. They have very limited medical care in those regions, and therefore they need to get a travel permit to go into Israeli areas and access hospitals there. But if they can't get that, they die. They're impoverished. Schools are bad. I mean, we're not even talking about the death and destruction in the recent conflict. We're talking really about decades of the systematic oppression, of the systematic declassification of Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, really relegating them to a second class of citizen, to something other. That is the point of an apartheid regime. You want to create a different class. You want to dehumanize them. They're a subclass. They're below you, but you actually want to maintain that system, and you want to keep that group because you actually need that group. So this is, for example, where apartheid is different from genocide. In genocide, you want to kill people. In apartheid, you want to keep the people because you need them economically. For example, in South Africa, you needed the black majority as a workforce. Another example of the continuation of the concept of apartheid is now that Amnesty is calling for gender apartheid and the recognition of gender apartheid, for example, in this Convention on Crimes Against Humanity. Because again, we have situations where now a group of people, in this case women and girls, are relegated into second-class status. It's a system of oppression. It's a system of segregation. No full political rights, no travel, no freedom to travel, or just, make your own life choices. No access to education, partially. So, again, apartheid is not a static system. It can be applied to other situations beyond South Africa, and has been. But it also, we believe, it should be applied to these extreme forms of segregation and discrimination, not just on the basis of race, but also on the basis of gender.
Okay, so now, as we know, Amnesty is an action, or any work of Amnesty is really action-oriented. So for our listeners who are activists or just a person who wants to get involved in, what kind of actions that we can take to address these issues?
Well, one is, what we would call traditional amnesty activity. Sorry, I'm a little bit older, so we used to actually still write letters. And you can still write letters or emails, you sign petitions.
Well, it's a digital, so you can sign online.
Yes, but you can actually also still write letters. These letters do make a difference. First of all, if prison authorities get lots of letters on a particular prisoner, they will think twice of, should we continue mistreating that prisoner? Even if they never pass on the letters, they will think about, okay, what are the costs of somebody is watching this? This is not in the dark anymore. What are the costs of us continuing to mistreat that person? If the person does get the letter, it's an immense moral boost for that person. They know they're not alone. They know somebody's watching. They even if you can't do anything about it, just the fact again that you are seen is a boost. We know that treatment of some prisoners got less bad when letters started arriving. Every December we have a campaign, Right for Rights. There's a prisoner in Hong Kong right now, Chow Hon Tung. Really cool person, really smart. She's a lawyer, but she's imprisoned now on various national security related charges. And she's in prison, so she has time. She writes back. So some of our activists have received replies, and she says, "Thank you very much, meant a lot, made my day on the day." It helps. She's also actually really cool as a lawyer. She's just out of prison. She's suing the prison authorities because in Hong Kong there's a prison rule that in the summer, when it's really hot, male prisoners are allowed to wear shorts. Women prisoners must continue to wear long trousers. And she says that's discrimination. And she's in prison and she's suing the prison authorities. Of course, the whole situation is dramatic with her in prison, but she's fighting back. And if then she gets the boost from the outside with these letters, I think that does help her. But even beyond these traditional things, one thing activists can do is, I'm sure everybody has some form of particular capacity or things you can contribute. So decades ago, I was a volunteer with a national chapter of Amnesty. And I happen to speak English reasonably well and better than my team colleagues. So I did a lot of the translations. Now, these days, maybe you're good in digital design. So you contribute your time by designing infographics. If you're really good, maybe you can code a game. We once had a campaign on North Korea, freedom of expression in North Korea, and we designed a game. So I'm sure everybody has something they can contribute at minimum time, something special, a talent that you have, where you just help us out because, there's so many crises, we said earlier, there's so many human rights violations. We just really do the best we can, but we can really use the help. But a third thing I would say is just, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to your neighbors about human rights issues, including outside of your country. Human rights are not some esoteric, ethical, abstract concept. The victims and survivors of human rights violation are real people. We're talking about real physical pain. We're talking about death. We're talking about no access to medical care. We're talking about discrimination. These are real things that are happening to real people. And I think by talking to our friends and neighbors, we're creating an awareness that this is real and this is something that needs to be addressed, which again contributes to the original point: don't let people get away with it. You know, we have this slogan in Amnesty: we are taking injustice personally. And that's not just in our countries, that's really a global idea. We very much believe in global solidarity. We believe in helping others, even if we don't have anything to do with them. But we believe that everybody is entitled to have their human rights protected. And if we can just do something little to contribute to that, I think that's great.
Well, that was my last question. And thank you so much for such an insightful discussion and what you do at Amnesty. Thank you so much for that. And it was really empowering to realize that every small actions actually lead to a broader change, and also there's so many different ways to get involved in human rights work. So thank you for saying that. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you feel inspired and learn something today.